Hello, welcome to today's video. This is going to be a top-down view, plus we're going to be using some from the book. We're talking today about page 72 of the Keyboard Musicianship, book 1. Okay, so what this is called improvisation or improvising. What we're going to do is we're going to create two measure answers based on two measures that are given. So what that is kind of like a call and response. We also have the antecedent and the consequent. We can say that question, answer, anything, any way you want to call it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these first two given melodies, or this melody, first two given measures of notes, and then we're going to complement those notes by giving in a good two measures that are based on the first two measures. It says here, improvise a two-bar ending, use the rhythmic values presented in the first two measures. So what we're going to be using in this the improvisation exercise are three skills, three techniques. The first one is called repetition. Repetition means we just repeat the same thing exactly as we have it before. So let's go ahead and play these first two measures. And what we're going to do is we're going to give a repetition, which means we're going to repeat it exactly as it says for the next two measures. Here we go. Those are the two notes, or just two measures. And then for repetition, we just play the same thing again. Very simple. Let's go ahead now and take a look at the next technique called sequence. So sequence is the same idea repeated on different tones. Okay? So one thing we want to keep in mind when we play our answer, it's not always going to happen, and you'll see why in a minute. It says think about moving toward the home tone, or the tonic note. In number 1, it's obviously going to be C. Okay, so the sequence is kind of like repetition, although it will start on a different note and it probably will end on a different note, though the elements of the first two measures will remain the same. So the rhythm will stay the same, the intervals will stay the same, the direction of the notes will stay the same, and of course the quality of the notes, or if it's diatonic or chromatic, that will stay the same. So let's talk about the rhythm. We have 4 quarter notes, and then 2 quarter notes and a half note. That's the rhythm. Next we have intervals, 3 repeated notes, unison going down a third, going up a fourth, and then going down in seconds, ending on a half note for the rhythm there. Next, we have the direction of the notes. We start off by going repeated, same note, going down on that measure or that beat, 4, going up to a fourth, going down, and then going down. And then, of course, it's diatonic because, as you can see, there is no key signature. All the keys are natural, or all the notes are natural. Okay, so those are our 4 elements. Let's go ahead now and create a sequence. A sequence, let's go ahead and get out of this page here. A sequence is something that can be going up or to the right on the keyboard, or it can go down and to the left on the keyboard. There are many intervals that we can start on away from the first note, but for today we're just going to consist of a second away from the previous first note. So what that means is when we have that melody again, okay, so remember the first note was E, and to sequence, instead of starting on E, we're going to start on F. So you noticed that the rhythm was the same. I had 4 quarter notes for the first measure, 2 quarter notes and a half note for the second measure. The intervals were the same. I did 3 repeated notes, down a third, up a fourth, down seconds. And the direction was the same too. Same note, down, up, down, down. And of course the last thing we talked about was if it was diatonic. Yes, it was. All white keys. Okay, so that is sequence. That's an example going this way. Let's try to see what happens if we go to the left. Instead of E, we'll start on D for the measure 3. Here we go. Very interesting. So I ended on this note, but then I started the third measure on that note also, and it ended on C. So that's a very nice way to end a melody, or a little phrase, or whatever. To end it on tonic or the home key. So did we, first of all, were the rhythms the same? Good. Were the intervals the same? Third, fourth, down second. Were the direction the same? Repeat, down, up, down, down, yep. And with the diatonic, they were all white keys, so yes, all 4 elements were the same. Okay. When we do sequences, according to rules, it's expected that we only repeat a sequence 3 times. So that includes the first instance, or the first time we play the melody, the theme, and then we sequence it either 2 times this way or 2 times this way. I think that's pretty much all we have an option to do for now. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we sequence it 2 times, going to the right. Interesting. So we have this note here. It kind of was building some tension. We have 6 measures in all that we've created, and that's as many as we are able to do. And if I were to do it a 4th time, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like it should be those notes at all. Something else needs to happen. We need the last 2 measures in order to make a nice even 8 to eventually end here on C, or on that C right there. We won't discuss that right now, however. Okay, so now that we've talked about sequence, remember, sequence means you repeat the same melody again, but you start on a different note, a second above usually, from the first note, the first given note on the first measure, which is going to be E, or if you sequence up starting on F, if you want to sequence again, you would start a second above from that F, which would be G. And that's what we did. Alrighty then. Now, for the last example or technique, I'm going to go ahead and write out those elements that we talked about. So the first one was the rhythm. 2 was intervals. 3 was direction. And then 4 was diatonic, which means it's in the key. Okay, so for the 4th or the 3rd thing that we're going to be talking about with our techniques is we're going to talk about contrast. So if we have these elements here, rhythm, intervals, direction, and diatonic, how can we contrast at least one, but keeping at least one exactly the same? So for all these examples, diatonic will always remain the same because this is not a video that will discuss chromatic. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off by giving an answer to these first 2 measures, but we're going to change the intervals, and we're going to go ahead and change the direction too. But the one thing that we're going to keep the same is, the rhythm, as it says here in the exam or in the instructions. All right, so let's go ahead and move this out of the way, right over there. What we're going to do is going to play this once again, change the intervals, change the direction, keep the rhythm exactly the same. Quarter notes, half note. All right, here we go. So let's go ahead and get away from this page again. Let's see what we can come up with. So contrasting, keeping the rhythm the same, changing intervals and direction. Interesting idea. So as you can see, I didn't exactly start a second above up this note. I skipped a third above, so that's new. I didn't have repeated notes. And I just went up once, and I just went down, 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 until I reached the home note C, which is what it asked us to do. Okay, so rhythm was the same, with 4 quarter notes and 2 quarter notes and a half note. The direction kind of changed. The intervals were pretty much just seconds. There were no thirds or fourths at all. So when you create your contrast, make sure that you keep at least one of those elements exactly the same, and you can change all the others, or you can just change one and keep the others the same. It's up to you. Okay, really experiment. Try different variations of that. Always, though, keeping one the same. Let's go ahead and try an example, just for fun, of keeping the intervals the same, but we're going to change the rhythm, and we're also going to change the direction. So this is going to be a little bit more complicated. Now, you will be tempted to write this down, and I want to ask you, please do not ever write any of these answers down. This is a mental exercise. This is also a playing exercise. Remember, when we play music on the piano, it's a new language, and it's a language of sound. Try to think, yes, of the notes in your mind that you usually see on the page, but try to picture it in your mind. Try to hear the sounds too. So remember, once again, we're going to be keeping the intervals the same. We have repeated notes. We go down, we have a third. Remember, I said the direction can change, so what if we go up a third instead of going down a third? And then we go down seconds. But we can actually go up seconds, or we can just go up second and go down second. So we'll see what happens. Now, when you create your answer, don't just jump into it like you're jumping into a pool before you wait 45 minutes after eating, because then you won't feel good about what you come up with. Think about your melody. So, what kind of melody should I come up with? I think I'm going to maybe change some of the rhythms. I'm going to see if I can add some eighth notes. Okay. Yeah, let's add some eighth notes, see what happens. Okay, so remember, repeated notes, third, fourth, seconds. Okay, here we go. So it wasn't exactly the same order, but I still did have a third in there. I did have repeated notes. I did have a fourth leap, and it was in the same direction though. And I did have seconds again. So I think everything was kept correctly with those intervals, but everything else changed. So it's important that you really, really think about your melody in your mind before you jump in and play it, because you may just come up with something that just totally sounds wrong. It does say on the page here, let's go and take a look. Don't worry about mistakes, because there are none in improvisation. And that is a big fat lie. There are mistakes when it comes to voice leading roles, and that's what we're preparing you for. We want this to sound good. Now, when you create your contrast, really, really practice all those elements again and try to come up with some good stuff. Remember, don't write it down. Try to remember it. Make and send me audio recordings if you need to remember it, but only do it with the sound. Next, number 2, we're going to go to improvise a 2-bar ending using any of the following rhythms. We have quarter notes, eighth notes, half notes, dotted half notes, and whole notes. Let's go ahead and take a look at our melody first. We are in D position, so that means we need to end on D. This is left-hand melody too. sequence. Oops, let's try that again. Okay, so that was the sequence. Let's try that again, making sure that we start with the first two measures. So it's kind of like doing, what you call it? Transposition when you do the sequence. Let's try to transpose one more time. So we started on here. Interesting. So that's diatonic. Kind of sounds like a little chromatic too. And now let's see if we can come up with contrast. Okay, contrast. Let's see what we can do. Maybe add some eighth notes or something. Let's see what happens. And let's see if you can figure out what we changed and what we kept the same. Okay, so try to think about what we kept the same and what we changed. We changed a lot. And now let's go ahead. Practice that as many times as you can. Let's go ahead and take a look at number 3. Improvise a 2-bar ending to the phrase using triads only. And it says move by seconds. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this here. This one's a little bit more limited because it says you can only move by seconds. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. What we can do, repetition. This is our repetition here for the sake of not having to play it again. And now let's go ahead and do a sequence. And we're going to actually go the sequence to the left this time. Rather interesting. That made it minor. And now for contrast. Alrighty, very good. And just as a little hint for the last two, the thing that stayed the same was diatonic. Everything else changed. Okay, now the last exercise, this one here, after you have practiced sufficiently, as many ideas as you can for the sequence, for the repetition, and for contrast, I would like for you to use all 3 of those elements when you create an actual 8-bar composition. It also says to choose a meter, a tempo, and a mood before proceeding. This is something that you will be writing down. It's best to confine the rhythm to the right hand. Okay, and we're going to be using the E pentascale, while the left hand stays as E and B. Okay, see if we can come up with something here. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's my little measure, or actually I think that was more like a 4-bar phrase. And if we were to add 4 more, we would come up with 8 bars. So really try your best to come up with something that's exciting, something that's interesting. You may make some mistakes, but just try your best. Alrighty, so let's come up with something, create 8 bars of music here, and write it down, send it to me on Tanara, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, and happy practicing.